Americans have Reddit. What's something that will surprise non-Americans? My European coworkers were shocked when I told them I used to drive 4 hours to see my girlfriend on the weekends. So that, edit, some additional context. This was in the Czech Republic where you can cross the entire country in 4 hours. Might be a no-brainer for some, but some New Zealanders were surprised to hear this when I visited in March. Texas is, in fact, not a giant desert. We have cities, suburbs and grass like anywhere else. Not to say that it doesn't exist at all here, it's just way more varied than a lot of people might think. Then again, I also never think anything of it whenever I see someone riding a horse, even if it's along the side of a highway. So some things hold up, I suppose. As someone who grew up on the Great Lakes, they literally look like oceans. They have tides. You can surf during the winter, and when you fly over them there are parts where in every direction, all you will see is water. If you intend to move to Miami, you will be surprised by the number of people that do not speak any English. The US is a net exporter of oil. It takes me at most 10 minutes to drive my car to work, but if I used public mass transport it would take a couple hours. In my area the summers can get as hot as 38°C or more, and average around 26°C not including humidity, which can get pretty high. The winters can get as low as 43°C and average around 12°C not including wind chill, which again, can get pretty cold. Average yearly snowfall in winter, which can start as early as late September and last as late as early May, is around 90 centimeters. This is my answer as to why Americans drive everywhere. Because A, public transportation sucks, and B, the weather is crap. And for those wondering, yes, I did get help from the internet converting the numbers to metric. Many restaurants will refill your coffee or iced tea for free. The phrase "how are you" is used as a greeting and not as an indication of a desire to know how the other person, usually a mild acquaintance, is doing. I'm not American, but I went there a couple years ago, and the thing that stood out to me the most is just how huge everything was. Then I got used to it a little, and that's when we went to Vegas, which is huge and extra even for American standards, also free refills. I've seen way too many people mess this up. New York is a state and a city. Distance. It always surprises me how close a lot of European cities are. The windmills in Wyoming, if allowed to run all day, will fry the power grid. Also, Wyoming has less than 1 million people in it. Basically anything about Wyoming. If you are in the Midwest, and you hear a siren and see everyone going inside, that doesn't mean North Korea has launched missiles and we're all going to die. Also, don't pass cops on the highway. Even if you are doing the speed limit, they don't like it. Wyoming can be more or less the same temperature as Antarctica at some points of the year. Might surprise other Americans, but in Texas, girls wear big ass ribbon things for homecoming called mums with bells and crap that are usually bigger than the girl wearing it, and they can cost up to $300. Here from Colorado, South Park is an accurate depiction. How Southern sweet tea is made, the way Southern give directions. Not all Americans allowed. My wife and I have traveled to Europe a few times now. People always think we are from England or Northern European. We are just quiet and mind our business. Walking isn't an option in large swaths of this country. The country is massive. It's the size of all of Europe. The country varies wildly in culture and topography. Most Americans have never seen a gun pointed at another person, much less fired. Smoking is considered a gross habit and is not allowed indoors in most states. At least in my state Ohio, you'll see a random log cabin every so often, typically in a park or in a town that is on the National Register of Historic Places. They have a sign explaining their history and are no longer used for anything unless they are a museum. These log cabins are typically about 250 years old. They are the oldest buildings in the area. I have to ask Google to convert to metric. Also, not everyone in Texas is a cowboy or has ridden a horse. There is a place in America where you can be in 4 different states at the same time. As friendly and as open as the world thinks we are, do not get into our personal space. We do not like to be on top of each other. We don't like to be crowded, even in our biggest cities. When we are standing at the corner ready to cross the street with everyone else, we will maintain a nice buffer between one another. I think that's why pickpockets aren't as big of a problem here than it is in Europe. Because we are so used to standing apart that if someone steps within our personal space, a sound alarm goes off and we become hyper aware of it. Even the most mellow of Americans will snap a "Do you mind?" at the intruder, which is American for "Back off, schmuck." Many Americans are incredibly generous and community oriented. It's the strange sort of dichotomy among some of the conservatives I knew growing up. I grew up in an extremely rural area, everyone would get extremely pissed if a new social safety net program was introduced, or be ready to badmouth nameless and faceless people relying on government assistance. But if someone lost their job, or got hit with a bad medical bill, or had some other tragedy befall them, it wasn't even a question. Everyone helped. Lawns were mowed, groceries were bought, children were babysat, sealed envelopes with money, checks were passed quietly without a word. As near as I can reason, it's probably rooted in pride coupled with an extreme distrust of government waste and a desire for individuality. Everyone wants to appear to be too proud to need help and put on a gruff, disapproving demeanor regarding social systems. But in practice, most people will support their fellow man. They just don't want to be mandated to help by someone on a government salary. We are not all Florida men. We are not all unintelligent. Many people here are very fit. Many are very fat. You must only focus on the fat ones. You can't visit Hollywood, Miami, Chicago and New York in a week. This place is massive. Everyone here owns dogs. Our bathroom stalls don't go all the way to the floor. Not everyone has gun and is fat. How friggin' massive our country is. I live in the state of Colorado. It is the 8th largest state in the union. You can fit the whole of the United Kingdom in my state and have a bit of room to spare. Now consider that the population of Co is only about 5.8 billion. So the UK shoves 60 million more people in a smaller landmass. We are both large and sparsely populated. We are something like 90 persons per square mile, which is a number Indians, Chinese, Japanese, and Europeans would salivate over. The flight from Boston to Honolulu is the longest domestic flight in the world, and it takes near 11 hours to complete. The flight from San Francisco to Beijing is 2 hours longer. One more thing not related to the gargantuan size of this country: we dramatically understate how influential the Native Americans were to the us culture. I lived in Dutch country USA when I grew up, but I also knew all 5 of the Iroquois nations and their common customs. Shoot. The entire idea of a state and local government bonded by federalism was based on that very political body. Before anyone gets excited, look it up. Minnesota is named after a Dakota word. I used to live near Schenectady, New York. The word means the place beyond the pines, which is Mohawk. It is difficult for me, an American, to understand the relationship between, say, the culture of the native and Picts and the Saxon, Dane, Norman culture that subsumed them, but it is probably similar. The difference is that there is 1,500 years that separates the influx of Saxon culture into the British Islands, but for the USA it has only been a scarce number of centuries. It is still fresh, as it were. Okay, Englishmen, hold on to your hats for this one in particular. You see, in the South, people make sweet tea by brewing black tea in a pot, pouring it into a pitcher up to about the 3, 4 or half mark dependent on taste, then filling the remainder with sugar. It is served cold, typically by adding ice and or keeping it in the refrigerator. A bit on the flip side, I'm South African, but I have an English neutral accent. When I went to America for the first time, I could not believe how heavily pronounced the RS were compared to my dropped RS. For instance, I was talking to someone and said under, and they thought I said under, and we spent 5 minutes trying to communicate before I said the word again with the R heavily pronounced. That we have non-indigenous languages that don't really exist outside the US. From past experiences with European friends visiting, there's 2 big ones. 1. How far apart everything is. A 20-minute drive is considered short in my city, and it can take the better part of 12 hours to leave the state. 2. How friendly Americans can be depends on the region. Total strangers will start conversations with you if there's something they find interesting. This can be anything from your accent to your jewelry or clothes. We really do have good beer. It just doesn't get exported. Here in Texas you can drink at any age, as long as you are being supervised by a parent. This is kind of obscure, but a lot of people are surprised that schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford and MIT are private institutions. In virtually every other nation, universities are almost entirely public with only a few exceptions like Christian universities in Korea. Private universities in most other countries are joke schools for people who can't get admitted to mediocre public universities. While that's also true for some private schools in America, most private universities are legitimate institutions and public universities measure up as well. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell for more Reddit content.